Hi everyone, my name is Claire Theaker Brown. I am the owner and founder of an Edmonton-based business called Unbelts, and I'm here to talk to you today about Sustainable Development Goal number 5. And that goal is, of course, to achieve gender equality and to empower all women and girls. So we're going to go on a little bit of a journey today. We've only got 15 minutes, but in those 15 minutes, what we are going to cover is, first, why SDG number 5 is the keystone sustainable development goal on which all of the other sustainable development goals rest. We're going to talk about some of the problems that exist within the global supply chain. And in the apparel industry in particular, we often really rely on our country of origin tags, like the one on the purple t-shirt you're seeing in the middle of this slide, to inform our decisions about which clothes to consume and whether that clothing is ethical. And I need to kind of share a little truth bomb with you right now, and that is that this tag, it does not tell you, it does not contain all the information you need to decide whether or not an item of clothing is ethically made, or whether it reflects a workforce in which women and gender minorities are fairly paid and treated. I also want to acknowledge that tag that tells you where a garment is made, it actually only tells you where a garment is sewn, where the CMT, or the cut and sew process of manufacturing occurs. It doesn't tell you anything about where the supplies come from or under what conditions those raw materials and those components were processed. And the reason that I'm mentioning this is because I am a firm believer that equitable garment jobs and equitable access to success within the apparel industry is not only possible globally, it is necessary globally if we are going to reach SDG number 5 and all the rest of our sustainable development goals. So let's talk about some of the problems that exist within the apparel industry right now. One of the primary issues is that the apparel industry is ostensibly for women, people who identify as women, and built upon women, or people who identify as women, but it does not overall benefit women. What I mean by that is that almost 75% of North American consumers who are purchasing clothing, both women's apparel, men's apparel, children's apparel, genderless apparel, identify as women. And over 85% of the international apparel economy is built upon women laborers in raw material factories, in component factories, and especially in the cut and trim factories. At the other end of the ladder, of the major apparel brands, only 25% have women at the helm, and fewer than 5% are owned by women. And what this signals to me is that there are women making clothes and there are women buying clothes, but there are not a lot of women making money from the trade of clothes. And this affects all of us. It doesn't matter whether you're a fashionista, it doesn't matter whether you buy your underwear at the grocery store. There's almost nothing more universal than putting something on to cover your body in the morning before you go outside. And so the sustainable fashion and sustainable apparel, or ethical apparel movement, is often really targeted at people who care very much about fashion and clothes. And I don't think that needs to be the case. So the problem that I just mentioned was that women represent the base of the apparel industry, and they also present the consumer funnel of the apparel industry, but they do not represent the power. So that's a big problem, and it is a big idea. And I know that for a lot of us, the idea that we can't necessarily separate made in Canada versus made in China, or made in USA versus made in Bangladesh, to inform us whether or not our clothes were made under exploitative conditions. I know that's kind of a new concept to a lot of us. So why don't we kind of drill down for a second into into my path into the apparel industry, and maybe by sharing a little bit of my experience with the workers who helped me start my business and are now helping it thrive. Maybe that can help sort of paint a picture of the opportunity that I see for change within the clothing industry. So I graduated from the U of A in 2008 with a major in industrial design and a minor in Mandarin Chinese. And I took that to China. I moved to Shanghai in 2008. And after I'd been there for about 2.5 years, I had a couple problems that I needed to solve. One was that I had an incorrigible dumpling habit and I really needed a stretch belt. The other is that I had really gotten to know quite a few of my neighbors who were local, who were Shanghainese, and a couple of them had really extraordinary sewing skills. They set up sewing machines on the street corner during the day and did mending for the neighborhood, and at night they wheeled their sewing machines back into their apartments. And they did this partly as a hobby, partly for a little bit of extra income. And as I got to know these ladies and realized, like, oh, okay, there's actually, they have very limited employment opportunities, um, partly because of, partly, partly because they didn't see it as worth it to work in a factory for long hours and lower wages, but also because they had caregiving responsibilities in the home, usually for grandchildren. So Unbelt started really, really, really small. I had a couple $1,000s and I started the business again because I needed a better belt and I wanted it to stretch. And so I hired a few of my neighbors to kind of produce a test run of belts, and I brought them back to Canada and approached retailers there. And that was the beginning of the business. And at the time, because my scale was so small, it seemed perfectly natural to me that I would negotiate my sewing team's wages with them, and that I would hear first about their needs and then figure out what I would need to price the belts at in order to pay them. But this is highly unusual. One of the reasons why there are so many women and gender minorities at the bottom of the apparel industry for very low wages is that typically apparel brands start the other way around. They have a target price that they need to sell a garment at for maximum profit, and they have to take the material cost out of that, and what is left is what they're willing to pay laborers. Now, China, like many countries, including Canada and the States, have minimum wages. But there's a way around minimum wages, not just in China, but again, also in Canada and US and the US. And that workaround is called a piece rate. So how does a piece rate work? A piece rate means that you pay by the finished piece that meets quality control specs. And the onus is on the worker to make as many two spec finished products as possible in as little time as possible, so that they can maximize their earning while minimizing their time investment. And that is hugely problematic and is really contributing to the fast fashion industry. Enormous quantities of very, very cheap clothes, which cause us as consumers then to expect more clothes on a quick turnaround as soon as a trend hits. This has to change. So this is one call to action I have as a smaller player in the apparel industry, but as somebody who cares very much about my former neighbors in Shanghai and about the sewing team that has grown since we started at Unbelts. I think it's really, really important that brands be willing to pay a living wage instead of a piece rate. And just as a side note, a living wage is not the same as a minimum wage. Here in Edmonton, where we now have a sewing studio as well, it's important for us, for me as an employer, to differentiate between Edmonton's minimum wage, which is $15 an hour, and our living wage, which is calculated at $18.10 for a family of four. How you raise a family of four? $18.10 an hour, I'm not sure. And that's where it becomes important for us to consult first with the needs of our employees and build out our product prices from there. So that, I think, is a fix that is a complete paradigm shift for larger brands, especially ones that deal in high volumes of low cost clothes, but it's an evolution that needs to happen. My second call to action for the apparel industry, let's move the window of myself over a little bit here, is an acknowledgement that caregiving is a job and it takes time. You know, good is to create accommodations for women and gender minorities who have caregiving responsibilities. Even here in, here in Canada, the caregiving responsibilities I think that are on women's shoulders have really emerged, especially during the past 2 years during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have seen a mass exodus of women from the workforce. We need to acknowledge that that caregivers need accommodations in their job in order to accommodate their caregiving responsibilities. But that's not the best possible outcome. Better would be on-site childcare. Can you do your job and have safe, affordable caregiving for your child? Excellent. But that's still not the best. The best is public policy and public funding for gender equal parental leave and publicly funded daycare so that everybody has access to upward mobility in their job. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back for a second here to just show you a couple of pictures. This is from when I was starting out in Shanghai and the very first prototypes of unbelts that were made in my bachelorette flat by my neighbors. And there's a picture of me going to one of the local markets to source elastic and buckles. So we've grown now, and we have an all women and gender minorities team. The admin team is based back here in Edmonton, and I've been here since 2014. And since moving back to Canada, my experience of the apparel industry from Canada has been really interesting and has opened my eyes a lot. Especially to the assumption of consumers here that, again, that assumption that made in China is just inherently unethical and made in Canada is inherently ethical. And also the assumption of what women's leadership roles in business can and should be. And living in Canada, I have become only more passionate about women's role in the apparel industry, not just on the supply chain side, but also in terms of, again, business ownership and leadership. Only 1% of women-owned businesses in Canada will exceed the $1 million annual revenue mark. And I'm really proud that we are one of those businesses, but it's shameful that we're part of 1%. I am really passionate about opening up more doors for women, not just in our supply chain, not just in our sewing teams, but also as we grow, we have more and more buying power to put towards women-owned component factories and to employ women both here in Edmonton and in China to create equitable, fairly paid jobs that accommodate caregiving responsibilities. But we can't do this all by ourselves. We can't do this all by ourselves. I can, as a business owner, do my very best to create great jobs and to advocate in my community. But I really need you to, I really need you as well to acknowledge that, yeah, you do not need to be, Anna Wintour to care about the clothes on your back or care about the clothes that you're buying for your family. Or what you purchase on a shopping trip with your friends. You have a really extraordinary opportunity to help enact change in the apparel industry just by asking questions of the companies that you are purchasing from. What kind of work are they doing? What kind of goals do they have for transparency into their supply chains beyond where the clothing is being sewn, but also the dealings that they have with their component and their raw material suppliers. And at the very least, there's one thing that you can do today, which is take the clothes that you love most in your closet and make them last. Now that you know how many pairs of hands went into your pair of jeans or your sweaters, and knowing that not only was your garment cut and sewn, well, that fabric was also made and that cotton was also grown. And there is a lot of honor and respect that we can bestow unto those pairs of hands who built our clothes for us just by making them last. So if I could encourage you to mend or to reuse or to repurpose, that would be my big ask for you today. And the next time you are shopping for something new, you ask yourself, how much benefit can I make with this purchase, and make the biggest impact you can. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Claire Theaker Brown. I'm the owner of Edmonton Business Unbelts. I want to share my email address with you here. If you have any questions or if you'd like to be in touch to explore these ideas further, please do reach out. Thanks so much.